Thank you again for being here. This is our fourth in a 7-lesson series entitled Created for Connection. And really appreciate your being here. What I'm going to do a little bit differently tonight, I think, because like I said it last week, but I'm not sure I followed through with it. The classes that I teach usually go a little bit better when I talk less and you all talk more. So I'm going to work on giving you more of an opportunity, and I think there will be some fun stuff for us to discuss this evening. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through the first part of the lesson in order to save more time for the second half. We've talked about the brain and how the new brain studies have given us all kinds of information that we never had before. And it's so important to understand that in the context of our relationships. But because of technology and scanning equipment, we can study the brain like we've never been able to before, and we can learn stuff about the brain that we've never been able to know before. The second class, we talked about self-understanding, and that's one of the most important things we can bring to our marriage relationships is how well do we understand ourselves. Because a lot of the irritants, a lot of the dust-ups, a lot of the conflicts that we have with our marriage partners are because we don't really understand ourselves so much. I talked with a couple recently, and she has a real serious anger problem, and she can go from 0 to 100 in a very, very short period of time. So what I'm working with them on is trying to help her identify, trying to help him be patient, but trying to help her identify, where did that come from? Where do those anger patterns come from? She doesn't really know, although I think she probably does and may not be willing to talk about that yet. But that's the kind of thing, I believe she brought that into her marriage. She has had those patterns of behavior long before she got married, but her marriage partner triggers those things and without knowing it and without doing it intentionally. But that's the kind of thing that can do some really very serious damage to a relationship. Yeah, we don't have much of an aisle over there on the other side of the... So, but you made it. You found a place to sit. So we talked about the brain, self-understanding, and we talked about God's plan last week. God's plan for our marriages and for us in our marriages and what we do to mess it up. And we all know that we can do a lot of stuff to mess it up. I wanted to just briefly talk about, and this is something I share with my clients. It was on the outline last week, but didn't have the opportunity to get to it. Anybody who's in a relationship that is not working, the relationship is not working very well, has three options. And this is a very simplified, in fact, overly simplified thing, but I think it's still very true. And I want the couples that come to me for counseling to understand this. If your relationship is not working very well, you got three options. Number one, you can live with it. You can live with it the way it is. But when I say that to them, they frequently start shaking their head back and forth because they've been living with it. Chances are they've been living with it a long time, and they've gotten to the point where we don't want to live with it anymore. So that's why we're coming to see you bozo. They don't say it exactly that way, but I say you can live with it. If you don't want to live with it, then the second option is you can change the way it is. That's really what couples counseling and marriage counseling is all about. It's trying to figure out who needs to change, how do they need to change, how can these changes be implemented, and how can these changes be sustained over time. That's the gist of couples and marriage counseling. But if we don't want to live with it and somebody doesn't want to change, the third option is we can split. We can separate or we can divorce. And sometimes they'll shake their heads like that. No. But my point is, if you don't want to live with it and you don't want to change, somebody's going to split. No, we don't want to split. Okay, if you don't want to split and you don't want to live with it, then you're going to be, if you don't want to change, then you're going to be living with it the way it is. But no, if we don't want to live with it and we don't want to split, somebody's got to change. And usually both people have to change in some very some very specific ways. So that's what we try to do in my office. So tonight we're going to talk about the overwhelming or the amazing chemistry of love. And this is one of the things we've learned about our brains in just the last few years that we knew a little bit about previously, but not a whole lot about. We know a whole lot more about it. Because this is what a lot of people believe. I can't help it. I cannot help falling in love with you. There's nothing I can do about it. It's completely and totally out of my control. And so we're going to talk for just a few minutes about some of the chemistry that leads people to believe that. By the way, that's not true. You can't help it. You can control your behavior. I mentioned these two people last week, Harville and Helen Hendricks. Harville Hendricks' most famous and most well-published book is Getting the Love You Want. In this edition, the front of the cover says more than 2 million copies sold. I think that's up to like 13 million now. It is translated into many, many languages. It is well known worldwide. But Harville has several. See, we're on a first name basis. I call him Harville. He calls me Harold. He's got a really, really important part of the book is in chapter 4, and entitled "Romantic Love." And remember now, Hendricks has been doing this for over 40 years. He's a well-established, highly respected therapist. And so over the years, he's asked couples to describe to him what it was like those first days and weeks and months. And we call it love, and really what it is infatuation. But that's the way that we're built. And infatuation is wonderful. I heard a speaker years ago say, he called it falling in love. He said, falling in love is great. I would do it every 2 weeks if my wife would let me. Okay. But what Hendricks has done is he said, when we first are infatuated and just enamored and completely overwhelmed with this other person, the biggest change in people is the way that they felt about themselves. Suddenly they had more energy and healthier outlook on life. They felt wittier, more playful, more optimistic, and more lovable. And it's because of the chemistry that's going through their brains. I'll share this story with you. I had one of my surgeries a few months ago. I can't remember which one. This may have been my elbow. I woke up from surgery and still had some of the drugs coursing through my veins, and they fed me breakfast. And I'll promise you today, this is absolute truth, it is the best breakfast it's a hospital breakfast. It's the best egg that I've ever eaten in my life. My wife came in about that time, and I promise you, I've never seen her looking more beautiful. Now, she's beautiful, but on drugs, when I'm on drugs, she's even more beautiful. You think she's beautiful now. But and I remember thinking about that. The food tasted better. I just felt great. This is before the drugs wore off, and of course, and the pain returned. But it was really an amazing sensation. So what Hendricks says in this chapter is, what causes that rush of good feelings we call romantic love. Psychopharmacologists have learned that lovers are literally high on drugs. natural hormones and chemicals that flood their bodies with a sense of well-being. We'll talk about some more specific things, but I love the way that he describes this. There are 4 things. He said, I'm convinced that from the beginning of time, when lovers are enamored and infatuated and just completely taken with each other, everything they feel can be boiled down to 4 sentences. I love the way he describes this. This is one of the things I share with my students at SMU, because this is how a lot of relationships begin. He said the first of these sentences occurs early in the relationship, maybe during the first or second encounter. And it goes something like this: I know we've just met, but somehow I feel as though I already know you. Now, you may be able to remember feeling that way, but he calls that the phenomenon of recognition. There's just something about you that is, I feel like we know each other. He said somewhat later, lovers get around to the second significant exchange of information. This is peculiar, they say to each other, but even though we've only been seeing each other for a short time, I can't remember when I didn't know you. Calls that the phenomenon of timelessness. When the relationship has had a little bit more time to ripen, lovers look into each other's eyes and proclaim the third meaningful sentence: when I'm with you, I no longer feel alone, I feel whole, I feel complete. The phenomenon of reunification. In other words, before you, there's something really important that was missing in my life. And so the sentence then, you complete me, or you are my other half. When I speak to groups, I usually say, if you have ever said to another person, you complete me, then call your therapist immediately. Because that implies, of course, that I'm not a whole person without you in my life. And that leads to the sentence number 4. Finally, at some point, lovers utter a 4th and final declaration of love. They tell each other, I love you so much, I can't live without you. The phenomenon of necessity. And when they say those things, they really mean it. They are very sincere. They're very serious. They really mean those things. But what we need to understand, what my clients need to understand, what you and your friends and family and children and teenagers especially need to understand, is that each one of these is a function of the chemistry that is going on through our brains. And talk a little bit more about that right now. I'll show you John Gottman's latest work. It's called Principia Amoris. The New Science of Love. This is the book that I'm using. I'm going to teach my class, my marriage and family therapy class, beginning in October. I've just adopted this book. I already used Hendricks' book, as a supplemental text, but I'm using Gottman's book as a text, brand new. So, and I'll go through this relatively quickly, because I'm not a chemist and I don't play one on TV. But he has identified a lot of the Gottman is he's a scientist and he is a mathematician. He's also a therapist. But science and mathematics are, and if you ever have a chance to look at this book, you'll see that very, very clearly. So he identifies several chemicals that are present in our brains when we are attracted to, enamored with, infatuated with. Okay, I'm not going to try the pronunciations. PEA is a natural amphetamine. You know that amphetamines are uppers. They lift us up. And so what this chemical does, it creates that magic moment of, quote, falling in love. By the way, there's also a big ingredient in chocolate, just in case. Pheromones, you know that those are having to do with our olfactory senses particularly, but they create an inexplicable sense of well-being. Everything's going to be okay. DHEA is another one that you may be familiar with. It's a natural aphrodisiac. Oxytocin, I mentioned a couple or 3 weeks ago. It is one of those chemicals. It's called the cuddle hormone. it compels us to get close to another person and create attachment and bonding. One of the problems with oxytocin is that it also creates poor judgment. We ignore the red warning signals, the flashing signs that say, watch out, beware, be careful. We blast right on through those warning signals when oxytocin is at work. And we really do believe at that moment everything's going to be all right. Yeah, the teenage girl may say, yeah, I know he's 10 years older than I am. Yeah, I know he has an arrest record. Yeah, I know he's got a couple of children somewhere. But that's not important now, Dad. That's not important now. Don't you understand, Dad? I love him. Everything's going to be all right. Well, Dad doesn't have that oxytocin going on in his head, and nor does Mom. And they know, no, you are biting off some really, really dangerous stuff here. But at that particular moment, she or he can't see it. Just vasopressin, testosterone, dopamine, estrogen, and serotonin are some of the others that are mentioned by Gottman in his book. So let me pause here for a minute and ask you a question. Why this is the way that we're built. We talked about the brain the very first night. This is the way God made us. Well, why? Why do you think we're built this way? What good can come out of this?
Procreation.
Yeah, that's one good. That's right. And when we're bonding to a healthy person, when we're in a healthy relationship, and we feel all these things, wow, that's wonderful. That's absolutely fantastic. There's a dark side to these. Any other thoughts about that?
Evolutionists would say survival of the species.
Yeah.
It's necessary to keep going and
Right.
these things instead of divine creation says is there for a purpose.
Right. Yeah, and that is, you read that, you don't have to go very far to read that's how the species has evolved, and to keep us evolving and procreating. That's the deal. But we are drawn to other people, and the chemicals are involved. Any other thoughts about that? Maybe. Go ahead.
For His own creation to show us that love, to show us love.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We are created in the image of God. And I don't know everything that means. I don't know exactly what that means. But we are created to be above the other animals. Other animals act instinctively, whether it's procreation or any other thing. But God has given us the gift of choice and the gift of being able to say no. And so Elvis was wrong. You can't help. You maybe can't help your attraction, but you can control your behavior. You can control whether you act upon that or not. Chemistry is one thing, but we still have our choices. And we looked at that a couple of weeks ago in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus said, don't kill, but I say you don't even be angry with the other people, because you're going to be more likely to kill if you allow yourself to dwell on anger or dwell on lust or those other things. And we can use our chemistry to strengthen our relationships, our healthy Christian relationships and marriages. So I'll just direct you to 1 Peter 2, 1 through 10. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but the first paragraph and then the last paragraph in that passage. What basically God is saying to us throughout the Bible, and especially through the New Testament, is that we have to put away from ourselves stuff that's going to be harmful to us. Anything that's going to be harmful to us and to our relationships, you got to get rid of it. And so what he says here in the first part of this passage, therefore, laying aside all malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking. Yeah, you can control all of those things. As newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the Word, that you may grow thereby, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is gracious. There are certain things, ideas, and things that will occupy our time and attention that we've got to just put behind us, put aside. And we got to replace those things with something else. And we are told in a couple of other passages, whatever things are pure and lovely and of good report, and that whole list, dwell on these things. These are the things to think about. Don't think about those other things. Dwell on these things. The last part of this passage reminds us of who we really are. You, my people, you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light, who once were not a people, but now are the people of God. You once had no identity, but now you are God's people, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. That's the message. That's the message throughout the New Testament, that don't be like this, be like this. Remember whose child you are. You are God's child, and you have a responsibility to behave as God's children. So we all know that. I've got to share this with you. Max Lucado is a really, really gifted writer, of course, and some of you, and he's spoken here on several occasions, and you probably have his books. I'm on an email devotional. Every morning I get a little message from Max. We're on a first name basis. I call him Max. And it's really, really consistently uplifting. It's usually an excerpt from one of his books, but one that came 2 days ago is entitled, Don't Fix Stupid with Stupid. Okay? It's really good. So he said, you may give in to the temptation with this thought, no one will know, I won't get caught, or I'm only human, or I can't help it. I'll add that one, as we saw just a minute ago. But then he says, don't make matters worse by doing something you'll regret. And he's talking specifically about sexual immorality. Years ago, a friend gave me this counsel. Make a list of all the lives you would impact through your sexual immorality. I did, he says. Every so often I reread it. His wife's name is Denelyn, so she's first on the list. Denelyn, my 3 daughters, my son-in-law, my yet-to-be-born grandchildren, every person who's ever read one of my books or heard my sermons, my publishing team, our church staff, the list reminds me one act of carnality is a poor exchange for a lifetime of lost legacy. You don't fix a struggling marriage with an affair. You don't fix a drug problem with more drugs. You don't fix stupid with stupid. Do what pleases God. Turbulent times will tempt you to forget Him. Shortcuts will lure you. Don't be foolish and don't be naive. Do what pleases God. Nothing more, nothing less. It's just not brain surgery. It's not rocket science. It's simple. But we struggle with that. So anyway, the point is that you can help it. You can control your behaviors. Now, one of the problems with chemistry, brain chemistry, is that it kind of leads us to believe things that are not true about our relationships. And so I'm going to go through fairly quickly here some of the myths and misconceptions of relationships. And these are not uncommon. So we deal with these a lot in the counseling office because that's how a lot of relationships get started. We believe these myths and then we realize somewhere into the relationship that they are myths, that they are not truth. But at some point we actually believe them to be true. So one of these is you fall in love. And you hear that all the time, and I hear it all the time, and you hear it all the time. And I want to help people understand that the problem with this is that love is very difficult to define. And I love my wife, but I also love hot fudge sundaes. Don't you? And I love beautiful scenery and sunsets. I love to travel, and it's all of those. It's all different stuff. So. Real love, agape love, as you know, love that's described in the Bible is a choice. It is a decision. It is not something we stumble into. It's not something we fall into. It's not something over which we have no control. But that's the implication. I used to work in a medical a residency program, and one of my best friends, a medical doctor, family practice doctor, would come to work some mornings. He said, "Well, it happened again this morning." "What happened, Tim?" And he said, "Well, I was driving here and I fell in love again." And and she's really a knockout. The girl in the next vehicle, who he had never met, never would meet, and knew nothing about. But that's the way people use this terminology. Another relationship myth is the one and only, or the right person. And so if we think there's only one person out there in the world for us, wow, and that sets up a real sense of desperation. Instead, here's the deal: if I think that my happiness, my marital happiness, depends upon finding the right person, oh my goodness, what a challenge is that? Instead of being the right person, that's the real challenge. It's not finding the right person; it's being the right person. And there isn't just one and only one person, or risk dissatisfaction and unhappiness for the rest of my life. Here's another one, really, really common one, that if I meet this person, or when I meet this person, all my needs will be filled. This is the person who's going to fill my needs. I mentioned it a minute ago, my other half, or you complete me. This is why it's so important to have a sense of self-understanding. What you don't know is when you meet that person and you think that he or she is going to meet your needs, fulfill your needs, that other person is thinking that you're going to fulfill and meet their needs. And guess what? You're both wrong. You're both wrong. Now, we can help each other find meaning in our lives and find fulfillment in our lives. But initially, it feels wonderful. It just feels wonderful to think that this person is going to be a part of my life. Okay, I was going to talk about, I was a teenager in the 1960s, and so the 1960s, I'm not sure there's ever been a better time for codependent, dysfunctional music than the 1960s. And I tell my students in my classes about the Righteous Brothers, and they've got the blank look on their face. Go ask your grandparents who the Righteous Brothers were, But the Righteous Brothers, you're my soul and my inspiration. You're all I've got to get me by. You're all I wake up for each day. You're all I've got to get me. Without you, baby, what good am I? I got nothing left if you leave me. Baby, I can't make it without you. You're the reason for laughing, for crying, for living, and for dying. It doesn't get any more serious than that.
Some of these hormones back here we don't want to do.
If you go, it will kill me. I swear it. I just can't bear it. Okay. Now some of you remember that, and that's not good. It's not good when you believe it. That's it. It's a fun song. But it's not good when you believe it. Okay, just a few others, and I'm going to skip through these so we can get to some other types of things. My needs will be filled. Marriage will solve my problems. What we have to understand is that people solve problems. People solve problems. Marriage doesn't solve anything. Marriage is for adults, so if I get married, then I'll be an adult, right? Okay, you'll love these next couple ones. Marriage provides love, happiness, fulfillment, and security. No. How many married people do you know who do not feel loved and happy and fulfilled and security? Multiple people. You'll like this one. I'll change him and her after we're married. Yeah, we can laugh about that now. But at some point we may have really believed that, and then we'll live happily ever after. So remember, this goes back to the brain lesson. What do we allow ourselves to dwell on? And I said then, and I'll just repeat again, If we're in a marriage that is less than satisfying, and in a marriage that seriously has some problems, if we find ourselves dwelling on and ruminating about what's wrong with him and what's wrong with her. I'm not happy. I don't think I'll ever be happy with this person. The only way I'm ever going to be happy is to get rid of this person and go with somebody else. And now, wherever you go and whoever you're with, you're going to bring yourself with you. And that's the good news and the bad news, right? Okay, just very quick. Absence of conflict is a sign of a good relationship. No. Remember, we can't control what thoughts come into our mind, but we can control what stays in our mind. I'm not going to comment on these maybe. In a good relationship, people stay the same. No, everybody changes. And so when he comes in, they come into my office and they've been married for 15 years and he's angry. And she's not the same person I married. And that's when I want to say, well, you bozo, of course she's not. And you're not either, by the way. And aren't you glad, and this is what I will say sometimes, aren't you glad she's not that silly, immature person that you married? Well, that's not what he means. Of course, it's not what he means. If my relationship is good, I'll not be attracted to other people. Attraction is a fact of life, but what you do with that attraction, like the Elvis video, is all important. You can be attracted to other people. You cannot act on that. If my partner expresses a need for time alone, something must be wrong. No. In a good relationship, I must suppress all my needs and devote myself to the other. No. You've got to be who you are in a healthy script, and the other person has to be who they are in a healthy script. Relationship partners should do everything together. No. Having a child will improve a bad marriage. Oh no, oh no. In a healthy relationship, partners should automatically know the other's thoughts and feelings and needs. Well, if you really love me, I wouldn't have to tell you. You know. Well, what's wrong? If you really loved me, you'd know what was wrong. Don't do that to each other. I think hopefully most of the people in this class have gotten past that, if you ever believed that. Now, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about Myers-Briggs type indicator. Do I have a website on your outline there? Myers-Briggs dot something?
Yes.
Okay. If you want to take this, and how many of you are familiar with or have taken the Myers-Briggs? It's a pretty popular, and a lot of people have. But if you haven't, or if you want to take it again, you can log on to that site. And I think you can do it free for nothing. But I know if you can't on this site, there are other sites online where you can take the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Very quickly, and then we're going to get into some specifics. What Myers-Briggs does is it helps us identify our preferences. This is not the typical psychological exam that tells you who you are, but it tells you what your preferences are. I'll give you an example. What I'd like for you to do right now, if you have a pen and you've got a piece of paper in front of you, then everybody take your pen and write your signature as you normally do. Got it? Okay. Doesn't take long. You do that all the time. You write your signature all the time, and so do I. Now, what I want you to do is put your writing instrument in your non-dominant hand and write your signature again. It's the same words, right? What are the differences?
You can read one.
You can read one and you can't read the other.
One's more readable, they're both unreadable.
Both are unreadable. One of them probably took you a long time to do.
When you only use X, that's pretty well.
You could do that with either hand. It took you long. You had to think about how to form an A or an R or whatever. So does that mean you're incapable of writing your signature with your non-dominant hand? No. So if you lost the use of your dominant hand and you had to write with your left hand or your other hand, could you do that? Yeah, you could. Eventually. It would take some time, but that's one of those neural pathways that we've talked about. And it also indicates that that you can change. You've got a preference. Right now, if you've got the use of both of your hands, you've got a preference for one over the other. It's what you're accustomed to. And we all are like that. That's what these Myers-Briggs types are like. It's a preference. So when we look at the first couple, it's the difference between people who have a preference for extroversion or introversion. And the question is, how do I prefer? What's my preference? At the end of the day, and I've worked hard and I'm tired, how do I prefer to charge my batteries? Okay, the doctor I was telling you about, at the end of a clinic day, he would go through the clinic, he said, who wants to go to happy hour? That's the last place I want to be. I have a strong preference for introversion. When I recharge my batteries, I want to do it with just one other person, maybe 3 other people, or by myself. I want to work on a crossword puzzle. I want to do something that is mindless. I want to watch a TV show, but it's usually very, very private. But there are some people who get energized by being with other people, by going to a party and being with other people. No, that's not my preference. But it's not unusual for an introvert to be attracted to an extrovert to be attracted to an introvert. And we'll talk in just a few minutes. This is when I'm going to give you a little bit more of an opportunity to talk about how these differences show up in relationships and how they can be problematic sometimes. The second set of types is the S and N, the sensing and the intuitive. So this is how do I take in information? A sensing person is just that. With the 5 senses, or however many senses we've got these days, they trust information they can see, they can smell, they can touch, they can hear. That is the more sensing person. The more intuitive person has more of a 6th sense. Okay, so you got an apple up here on the table. You ask a person, describe the apple. Describe the apple, and the S person is going to say the apple is so big, so many inches or centimeters big. It's these colors. It's got a stem. It's kind of leaning to the left, and will be very specific and concrete about those descriptions. The N person might say those same things, but the N person might say, you know what? I can smell an apple pie. The possibilities. The intuitive person is going to go beyond the senses. Yeah, I can see this apple pie just like my mom used to make. I can see inviting some people over to eat the apple pie. So it goes way beyond just the concrete description of the apple. We've got the thinking and the feeling, preferences. This is how decisions are generally made. It doesn't mean that the thinking person doesn't have any feelings or the feeling person doesn't think. But one of the best examples of this is you are a supervisor in your organization. You have 5 people who are direct reports to you. The word has come down from on high that we're going through some budgetary cuts. We cannot support 5 people. You've got to eliminate 1 person out of the 5. So upon what bases, what criteria do you choose who stays and who goes? So how would the thinking person make that decision?
Performance reviews.
Yeah, you got performance, you got attendance. What else you got?
Seniority, salary.
Yeah. All the concrete stuff. Attitude would probably play a role in that. What's different about the feeling person who makes decisions more based upon feelings?
We may take emotion into account. Like if they know an employee has maybe some struggles at home, they may.
Perfect.
that.
Yeah, I know that she is not the best producer in the world, but doggone it, she's a single mom. She's got to have this job. Okay? Now the thinking person is not oblivious to that, but he or she is not going to take that into consideration when they're making that decision. So a thinking person can seem really cold-hearted at times, and they're really not. They're just doing what they prefer to do. And the feeling person is doing what they prefer to do too. The fourth set of characteristics is the names of these are not the best. Judging and perceiving. Judging doesn't mean this person is judgmental, but it's the question: how do I like my life to operate? I am a strong J. I'm a strong I and I'm a strong J. And what that means in my life is there's a place for everything and everything in its place. That my schedule, my life goes according to schedule. And if I'll tell this story on myself, because my counseling day is scheduled, okay? But after I leave the counseling office, there's also a little bit of a schedule. I may need to go by the cleaners or go by the drugstore. And so one afternoon, Joy called me. She knew I was getting ready to leave. And she says, can you pick up a gallon of milk on your way home? Now, I've confessed to you, I didn't say this to her, but my knee-jerk reaction is, that messes everything up. I can't do that. That's not on my schedule. It completely messes my schedule up. Did anybody identify with that? Can you appreciate that? And then when I thought about it, of course it doesn't mess anything up. Of course I'm going to make this other stop. It's easy. But I'm just telling you what my initial reaction was. So sometimes J's border on OCDs, okay? Sometimes we're really close to that line. And it's really important to recognize that. So, okay, here's where we go. I'm gonna start with the E and I stuff, and I'm going to put up some characteristics here because these have to do.
Dr. Duncan, can I ask you?
Yeah, please.
One more question.
Go ahead.
Back to this the myths.
Oh, okay.
When you say, you have on here with myths and misconceptions, the one and only, the other will fulfill my needs as being
Yeah.
a myth. But isn't kind of almost when you go to a marriage aspect, that almost needs to be a mentality you have so that it avoids kind of your straying, so that it avoids kind of going kind of off a track in a way.
I don't disagree with that. In fact, I'll tie it into the Myers-Briggs stuff, that it's very common for I's to be attracted to E's, for T's to be attracted to J, where it's very common to be attracted to people who have characteristics we don't have. And so in a sense, that's kind of like I admire somebody who has these characteristics that I don't have in myself. So in a sense, that is, I'm filling a void or a gap in my life. But the myth of that is if I expect that other person to fill all of my needs, my anxiety needs, or the depression needs, I expect that person to keep me pumped up or to keep me reined in. That's not their job. That's my job first and foremost. So that's.
You made a mistake. They're not the one.
Yeah. And that's the problem with the mythology. When you buy into the myths, and then after you've been married for a little while, sometimes it doesn't take very long, and you realize that didn't happen, then what you can do, if you buy into that one and only, you can convince yourself that I chose wrong. This is not my one and only, which means my one and only is still out there somewhere. And I if I'm going to be true to myself, I've got to reinitiate the search. And you know people like that, and I know people like that who have made the same mistakes over and over again because they don't recognize the myth is a myth. Yeah. Let's go to the E's and the I's. I'm going to put up.
Perceiving real quick, 'cause I just
I'm sorry.
thought
Would you say?
perceiving. You said the judging was like very sketchy.
Oh, I didn't say perceiving. Yeah, the perceiving people are very spontaneous. They can ebb and flow throughout the day, and so if they're on task to do something, but something else comes up, then I've got a cartoon sometimes I show of these Huns that are storming the castle. And they're going over the drawbridge into the castle. And one of them looks and says, "Ooh, look, goldfish." That's the P. That's easily distractible. Sometimes they find it very difficult to stay on task. But they can bob and weave very easily, and I find great difficulty with interruptions, for example. Anything that I think interrupts my schedule. You recognize anybody you know? Okay. Don't answer that. Don't answer that question.
I'm all the left side.
All right. Okay. Okay. Perfect. What the Hendrickses will say is we are attracted to people who are going to help us heal whatever wounds we have. I think there's a great deal of validity to that. I think everybody brings certain amount of woundedness into a relationship, but the problem is when we get attracted to these people and we marry these people, sometimes the differences become the biggest sources of irritation, and it become big sources of conflicts. Talk about some examples right now. So let's look at extroverts. These are just some characteristics of extroverts and introverts. Extroverts prefer variety and action. They're usually good with people. I won't have to read all of those for you. Introverts, as I illustrated a minute ago, prefer quiet and concentration. May have trouble with names, dislike interruptions. Yeah, that's me in spades. Like to think first. So if I'm in a class like this and the teacher opens up for discussion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to think through what I might say before I say it. I'm not going to just blurt it out. But an extrovert, he or she will blurt it out, and they may have to clean it up later. I didn't mean to say that. What I meant to say, but that's just the way they are. Extroverts think out loud. So the doctor I was talking about, I used him as an example. He's walking around the clinic one day, and his glasses are up on his head. Okay, they're propped up on his head. But he's walking through and he's thinking out loud. He says, I don't know where my glasses are. I can't remember where I left them. Has anybody seen my glasses? So he's saying all this out loud, which I would never do. If my glasses are propped up on my head, I'm going to be looking through, I'm going to be looking for them, and somebody say, "What are you looking for, Harold?" "Oh, nothing." I'm not letting you know what I'm looking for. That's right. Exactly. Okay. So looking at these lists, here's an example. The extrovert really likes to be with people and likes activity. So the extroverted spouse may come to the other spouse, the introvert, and say, "You know what? We need to go out. We never go out anymore." And the introvert will say, What do you mean? We went out 3 weeks ago. We go out all the time." And that's a very different perception and a preference. Can you think, this is where you can join in. I hope I left a little bit more time to discuss. Any examples that anybody wants to fess up to?
Why is it that introverts have trouble with names? I'm just curious. That was kind of that's just something that kind of sticks out.
A lot of times we can be so focused on what we are thinking or what is going on with us. We may not play. Now it's not. Huh?
Well, an example I know for myself.
Go ahead.
If I look you in the eye when you introduce yourself,
Right.
and I'm thinking about you,
Yeah.
I will remember your name
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah.
But I always find myself thinking about something else.
Yeah.
Thinking about probably what am I going to say next.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a good point.
And just as soon as they mention their name, I think I don't know their name.
That's right.
I
Hey.
don't listen to the name.
Yeah.
Right?
No, but
So
you're
that's
right.
why I think introvert. I'm introverted to
And-
a certain extent, and I definitely believe that's why.
But each one of these, and I'm glad you brought that up. But each one of these sets of types is you have a preference for one or the other. Doesn't mean you can't do the other. I have a preference for introversion. When I teach a class, I can be extroverted, but it kind of wears me out. It drains me because it's not something that comes the most naturally to me. So I think Joy said before the class that you can be a fake extrovert. Yeah, she's also an introvert, but she used to work in fundraising and would put on these real big fundraising events where 800 or 1,000 people are there. And she can work a room, and she's really, really good at it, but it's all fake. But it wears her out too, I think. So you can do either of these, but you usually have a preference for one or the other. Let me, for the sake of time, go into the sensing and the intuitive. The sensing people, they want and trust and remember facts. They like to go step by step, sequential steps to a conclusion. On time is very important. It's very important. Not so much to the intuitive. Intuitive people like ideas and theories and possibilities. They may reach conclusions quickly. Now, this is something that I'll tell again on myself. For the last, year and a half we've been remodeling our house? 2 or 3 or 4 years? Has it been that long? Seems like forever. We'll discuss possibilities, and she'll say, I think I like this for this. And I'll say, I don't know, I like this. And I will say, yeah, I think we ought to do this. We ought to pull the trigger. We ought to do this so I can check it off my list. But then on several occasions, she's not bought into that. And we have waited, and in fact, I'm glad we waited, because I would have made a decision that I would have regretted later. Intuitive people, not so caught up with being on time. It starts when I get there. Whether I know. It's really a good idea when we're trying to get to church for the S person to not sit in the driveway honking the horn for the N person, the intuitive person. Other examples that you can think of for this? Let me put the others on the board, and then you can come back with your comments or questions if you have any. The thinking and the feeling people. Remember, this is how decisions are made. The thinking person does not show emotion easily. And in fact, as I said a minute ago, may hurt another person's feelings without knowing it. He or she may say something that kind of sounds cold and unfeeling.
Kind of a bluntness.
Yeah, and like the letting go of the single mom who, and people can say, how in the world can you do that? And he might say, do what? Do what? I was told that we can't support 5 people, I can only have 4, and she was the low person on the totem pole. But that person can be perceived by others as somewhat blunt, cold, or cruel. The feeling person is very aware of their own feelings, but also very aware of feelings in other people. And they enjoy pleasing people. This is something, I'm an F more than a T, and I've struggled with the people-pleasing thing pretty much all my life. Gotten a little bit better about that in the last few years. But we like harmony and accommodation, and can't we all get along? But the T person said, nope, there's a black and a white, there's a right and a wrong, there's a good and a bad. And I know all that, but can't we all get along?
Music influence.
Pardon?
That's your music of the 60s influence.
Oh yeah, probably right. And we like approval and praise, so the T and the F. And then the J and the P. These are lifestyle preferences. So this is some stuff that we deal with on a daily basis, honestly. J people prefer schedules and plans. Amen, brother. And there's something wrong with you if you don't. And that's my philosophy. In the morning, they know what their day is going to be like. They love making lists. They love closure. I had an elderly aunt in Tennessee who I loved dearly. She passed away 2 or 3 years ago at the age of 101 and a half. And I had the opportunity to visit her about 3 times a year. I go up to spend a weekend, and she is the most J person that I've ever known. She puts me to shame. But when we got there, she always had her list of of chores. She knew that I was coming, so she would make this list of chores. And they were things like change a light bulb and light the pilot light or turn off the pilot light or whatever. And so we would go through her chores and she would draw a line through her chores. But every once in a while she would think of something that was not on her list. And she said, oh, I meant to ask you to hang this picture. Okay, no problem. Go hang the picture. She's going back to her list, you know, and she writes that down at the bottom of her list and then marks through it. That's a J. And that's why I loved her so much, okay? Yeah. Okay. Huh?
Usually they get along. My wife, she makes a lot of lists, but they're all from me.
She knows the drill. And sounds like you do too, probably. The J's, we work first and then play later. The P's are very, very different. They adapt very, very well. They are very spontaneous, creative. There's no problem leaving things open. They may have difficulty making decisions because something else may come along that I haven't considered yet, see? And as far as work and play are concerned, work and play go together. We can turn work into play. We don't have to separate and segregate work and play, you see. There's a lot of stuff I admire about P's. But boy, they can...
I don't understand where the terms come from.
Yeah, there are reasons why those terms are there, and I can't tell you what those are right now. But they don't really communicate as accurately as the others do, the E and the I and the S and the N and the T and the F. So very quickly, we'll take just a few more minutes and see what else you've got, you've got to share here. Remember, we are often attracted to people who are a different type than we without realizing it. And when we're attracted to somebody and we get enamored with somebody and we get infatuated with somebody, then those chemicals start kicking in. And some of those chemicals help us just kind of blow past any warning signals, flashing yellow or red lights. We think everything's going to be okay. And these are manageable, but the reason I think this is important for this class is these are some of the things that some people really seriously get hung up on. We talked a couple of weeks ago about different types of conflicts, situational conflicts, temperamental conflicts, and then structural conflicts. These would come under the temperamental head. We have a heading. We have conflicts there. And so just to kind of close it out, the challenges in relationships when we are with someone in a marriage relationship who is very different from what we are, and that's the rule more than the exception. We're going to be with people who are different. The challenge of relationships is that we recognize the differences. And this is the hard part. This is the real challenge, is that we celebrate the differences. I know I'm a J, I know I'm an I. Can I celebrate the person who's the E and the P? That's the really challenge. Here's the third thing. We need to recognize the impulse to remake the other. And we have to resist the impulse. I'm sending out, did those of you on the mailing list get my mailing Monday about anger? Okay. If anybody's not on my mailing list and you want to, I've got the sign-up sheet here, and you're welcome to sign up. I just finished another one today that's going to go out on Monday, and it's on the topic of safe conversations. And we're going to have a Safe Conversations workshop. My colleagues and I are going to facilitate that. And I think it's 3 weeks.
October 15th.
It is October 15th. 3 weeks from this Saturday. Yeah, October 15th. And so that will go out. But the whole point of Safe Conversations is helping us learn how to tolerate difference. And according to Harville and Helen Hendricks, that's one of the ways that most couples get tripped up, is we're attracted to each other because of our differences, But then after we're married and married for a little while, we try to change, maybe not overtly, but very subtly, sometimes not so subtly. But we try to change the other person. And the message that communicates to them is that you're not okay as you are. Our marriage would be much better if you were more like me.
But if you're a T, then they don't really care.
But if you're what?
If you're a T, they really don't care what the other.
That's right. If you're a T, it's okay, whatever, right? That's where so many couples get tripped up. We communicate to the other person, there's something wrong with you. Remember the 4 horsemen? I did that maybe the first night. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Maybe that was last week. I cannot remember. One of those is criticism. Criticism is when I look at my partner and say, there's something wrong with you and you need to change it because I think there's something wrong with you. Right? That's a very damaging message to deliver. So I've run a little bit over, and I apologize and hope I didn't take advantage of anybody's time. But thank you again for being here, and thanks very much for your comments. Let's pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for our lives and for our relationships. And thank you so much for making us as you have. Thank you so much for bringing us together with the people who are in our lives, family members and marriage partners and children and grandchildren. Thank you for the relationships that we have. Please help us to be mindful, to be aware of what we can do when we communicate messages that are not healthy and that are counterproductive. And help us learn to help each other feel safe and increasingly safer in our relationships. It's through the strong Son of God we pray, Jesus. Amen.